Hi friends, welcome back to the Holistic Health Podcast. I think I want to start this episode by acknowledging that we've obviously talked about a lot of health trackers randomly weaved it into our conversations over the years, I would say, because, we love an experiment, we like to try different things, and I also think that I've seen the benefits of tracking health data and the drawbacks. So the first thing I want to say up front is that I don't think just because you can, you should, but I do think that there's benefits to some of the tools that we're about to talk about. I just think you've got to know yourself. So I think for someone who can be relatively neutral or even like motivated or inspired by data, like health tracking data of themselves, I think that many of these tools that are available can give you a net positive. But I also think that in some ways, in my experience personally, and it's been super subtle to be honest, that the less I have tracked for like long periods of time and the more I've just like dipped in and out of it or just chosen wisely what I use, the more it's actually allowed me to trust my own observations of my body as opposed to needing data fed back to me. And the other thing I'd say where I've seen it come unstuck a little bit is with clients who already have quite a moderate to high level of health anxiety or who are really quite obsessed with health optimization. And it's hard because obviously that is also the exact market that these devices and trackers appeal to. And I don't think that it's, as I said, a bad thing to track. I just think you want to check whether or not it's completely dictating how you then feel that day, because our mind is so powerful, and sleep trackers are the perfect example of this, of where for some people tracking their sleep, like using an Oura Ring, which we'll talk about in a moment, can be really helpful, can be really actually reassuring feedback of, oh, actually, I'm not doing as bad as I thought, or hey, I really noticed and realized and it confirmed what I thought around when I eat later or when I have a certain meal, it affects my sleep in this way. And that's really good information to know, and I'm going to change my habit off the back of that. But for other people, it can just be this source of like, I'm not well, I'm not healthy, I haven't slept good, I've got, X, Y, Z going on. And I think particularly this is a problem when you can't do anything about it. So if you can do something about it, as in you can change the behavior off the back of what you're tracking, and it doesn't feel like it's something that's creating anxiety, brilliant. If you're someone who that you're just in a season of life where you're doing the best you can with your sleep, for example, or your stress, and wearing a device that is feeding back to you how stressed you are and how little sleep you're getting, is that really going to benefit you? So that's probably just the first thing I want to open with, is a bit of whiplash around, yes, they're good, no, they're not.
Well, it's really good point, because I've had my Oura Ring now for, actually it'll be 2 years in a couple of weeks. And I wouldn't say I experience health anxiety much, if at all.
I don't reckon you do.
I don't think I do, but I do get anxiety in general, so that's fun. And then I have been wanting one for a while. I was actually lucky enough to pick up one secondhand on Facebook Marketplace for like virtually half price, but it was brand new. So I was like, yes. But what it did do is it confirmed some of my suspicions around how stressed I was. And that actually freaked me out, to be honest. My HRV was like 19.8. It was shocking. If anyone has never looked at this, that would be meaningless to you. But an HRV is very personal, of course, and relative, but that's a shit score no matter which way you look at it. And I actually did have a period where I was redlining. I knew I was redlining, and then when I was confronted with the data confirming it, it was sobering but also panic inducing. So I'm not immune to that. So just whenever someone says, oh, do you recommend them? I always say, well, just be mindful. You're going to, it'll take you a while to sort of get accustomed to the app and what it tracks, but also you have to go into it with the right mindset and really be able to hold yourself if you are confronted with data. That being said, I hate this about myself, but I am an extrinsically motivated person for the most part from what I've worked out. And what's annoying about that is I'd love to be one of those people that's intrinsically motivated, but I'm not one of God's favorites. So I have to motivate myself from the outside. But what it did serve me really well was it actually gave me data I could take action on. And it really made me lift my game in a lot of areas, and I learned some really unique things about myself around how much deep sleep I needed and how that correlated with how crappy I felt the next day or how good I felt the next day. It also, with the readiness score, it really tracked. And in some ways, not that I gaslight myself, but when you don't have raw data and you just kind of got your own feedback and you're like, oh, am I really that tired? I just need to push a bit harder. And it was kind of nice to go, actually, no, you're really not in a good way. And here's some adjustments you could make, made those adjustments, saw the things improve. So in a way, it allowed me to support myself a lot better. I'll tell you one really interesting thing I found out. Well, it's not that interesting. It's probably boring as shit, but I'm going to tell you anyway. But one of the things that really I was surprised by was, so I get really bad anxiety and on and off. It's basically a co-pilot, and it just sometimes pipes up more often than others. And I'm working on the CPTSD in the background to that. But when I feel really anxious and stressed, I find it very hard to settle down and focus and do things, which then means I procrastinate, and then things get more out of control, which then makes me more stressed, which makes me avoid it more, and it can kind of snowball a bit. And it can be very difficult to kind of knuckle down when I get in a bit of a spiral. But what I noticed was I was way more stressed when I was avoiding doing the thing I needed to do than when I was doing the thing I needed to do, even though that was stressing me out. And I was like, So actually, I'm doing myself a favor by just not battling through it, because I'm not a fan of that technique, but actually holding myself and really nurturing myself through it and confronting the anxiety that rises from taking action, because it's actually worse for me to not take the action. And I know you're probably sitting there internally rolling your eyes.
No,
you're like, of
not.
course, because this is a superpower of yours. But to me, it was actually such an insight into the impact on my nervous system. I thought I was doing myself a favor by going, I'm just going to have a rest before I tackle that thing, or I'm going to meditate first, or I'm going to go for a walk. Oh, I might do a few less stressful tasks first to kind of warm my brain up and then get to it. I've tried all of the techniques, herbs, vagus nerve stimulation. I've done a lot of things, but the cold hard data said just do the thing, and it'll be less stressful than not doing the thing. So in that sense, I had both the pros and the cons of tracking the data. And overall, for me, it's absolutely beneficial. I think I don't obsess over it, but I do use that as feedback. I also noticed when I do weights resistance exercise, I get more deep sleep, which is very interesting. But anyway, I digress. Talking about the Oura Ring, that is definitely one of my favorites in terms of wearable data. There are other rings. There's the Ultra Human ring. If this ever claps out, which it probably will at some point, I'll probably try the Ultra Human ring. Very similar, not as expensive. Their plugins actually look better. They had to reformulate their hardware because they got sued by Oura for being too similar. But I think they're both on par. But generally, I rate it. But be prepared if you're anxious or have health anxiety. It may not be a great first step. Make sure you have support to implement the feedback your data gives you, and for the love of God, put it in flight mode when you're wearing it. And that goes for all things, which we will talk about in a moment. But Yes, I am actually a big fan.
Yeah. I'm a big fan too for, like, I feel like you're a great example of, for all the reasons you just shared, of why it can be a really good fit in terms of that, you know, extrinsically motivated and, you know, just, yeah, I think that's a perfect example. And I think on the flip side, I mean, I've used the Oura, but then I kind of just stopped because I have many things that you don't struggle with that I do struggle with, but I'm intrinsically motivated quite heavily. And so I think that I didn't find it to be as beneficial for the longer term. I think that my main, like, where I found it to be super helpful was the convenience of tracking my cycle. Because I was finding that I was just a little bit too inconsistent with just doing a digital thermometer, but we will talk about the other thing that we will use. And I also found that I was using it to more understand that I was getting enough steps in a day. But that's where I wouldn't call it anxiety kicked in, because I didn't have anxiety, but I put a lot of like pressure or expectation on myself to make sure I hit a certain amount of activity every day consistently, even though, like, to the point where I'd then more easily override my own body's signals of I need to maybe rest, even though I haven't done 10,000 steps today, knowing that in a week I'm a very active person, I'm going to get enough activity in. So that's where I found, for me, even though there was a benefit in terms of, like, you know, seeing where I was at in my cycle with the temperature tracking that it does, and I just found it really easy to be wearing something. And the sleep stuff was interesting, but it wasn't an area I was struggling with. I found that what it did for me was pull me away from continuing to practice listening to my body and its needs, particularly around rest versus expenditure. But and that's, again, like, such a perfect example, because I think most people know who are listening that we're quite opposite in a lot of different things in terms of our strengths, our weaknesses, probably why this works so well. And even sometimes in our health challenges, as in, you know, we've spoken about before, you've got quite a robust hormonal system. Mine's
bulletproof.
Mine's the most sensitive snowflake that ever did exist, you know, and so I think it's good, like, this is a great conversation to be having around it, of even like, hey, it can be a really great device and tool for someone and not be the right thing for someone else. The other device I have, I think we're on the same page with, that we love and that would recommend, is TempDrop. So
big fan.
I'm a big fan of that because, so for those who don't know what TempDrop is, it is another wearable device that tracks your body temperature with the intention of helping you to implement part of the fertility awareness method, or the thermal part of the symptothermal fertility awareness method, where you're tracking your temperature to understand when or if you've ovulated, and also to get other insights into your cycle as it relates to your body temperature. And we've done many episodes that weave into the conversation, the TempDrop and body temperature. But that for me has been a really easy yes. It's a really easy recommend for me as well. But again, I still think it's not for everybody. So I think it's amazing if you are wanting to track your body temperature, if you're wanting to use, get data on your cycle that is more cost effective than doing a blood test all of the time. And it also, as I said, allows you to, move towards practicing a way of cycle tracking that can help you either with conceiving or avoiding conception. There are nuances to that in terms of, technically speaking, the statistics around the effectiveness of the symptothermal fertility awareness method is based on using not a TempDrop, but there is, in my clinical experience, enough of a correlation when used appropriately and taught how to track your temperature properly that it's an option, but it's just good to specify that there's nuance in that. Where I think that where I've seen it not be a great choice for someone is if they're in an extended conception like trying to conceive, and they have been trying for a long period of time, and they are finding that it's giving them a lot of anxiety around, you know, after their temperature has shifted, watching it and watching if it's dropped, if it hasn't dropped, if it's staying elevated. And even though that's going to be happening anyway, in terms of they still have to wait that period of time between ovulation and whether you get a period or you've fallen pregnant, and there still can be anxiety in that. I've found that for some people, the hyperfixation on the temperature itself creates another layer of anxiety and hyperfocus in a season or a time that already can be a really big factor. And similar, I've seen it for some clients where they're really trying to work on their hormones and they're like, that's like their key focus, and they're tracking their temperature to try and help with assessing that, and they become quite obsessed and hyperfixated and paranoid or anxious around any little deviations in their temperature where it compared to where they think it should be or where it was last month. And again, that does not happen for everyone, and it's actually, as a practitioner, I'm sure you'd agree, it's such a helpful tool if people are able to do it, but I wouldn't recommend doing it if your experience of doing it is creating more anxiety as opposed to just providing you with data that is either motivating you, informing change, or confirming something in a way that is not activating for you.
Yes, I think that taking into consideration where your mindset and your head and your mental health is really important. Same with women who've conceived. I know I've had 4 babies this year, not personally, but my clients. That would be
that's a good idea. I should count how many I can't do it on the spot right now, but I love that idea.
Oh, it's so nice.
I know, it's the best news ever, isn't it?
It's the most fun. I feel like I'm the one that fathered the child just about. I'm like, this must be what it feels like, close to feeling like a dad. I remember the first client, I got pregnant. No.
Yeah.
I was like, I wanted to run screaming around the neighborhood, particularly because she was PCOS and it took 6 months to sort of correct her cycle and then another 3 cycles for her to fall pregnant. But it's just the best. It never gets old. But what I'll say about that is, you know, I've personally used TempDrop for 15 years with the symptothermal method as a form of contraception, and I recommend it almost without exception to every fertility client that I've got, because although the oral temperature is the traditional method, I used that actually in my early 20s. This absolutely, when it's used appropriately with the right rules, is great, particularly for conception, but even for contraception. But what can happen is when you see your temperature either stabilize because you're pregnant, or you see it dip and then rise, you can then, like, if you keep tracking it and it's like zipping up and down, that can absolutely do your head in. And I'm like, once you're confirmed pregnant, just put it away and retire it until you need it later. Yeah. And what I will say too is I have both the TempDrop and the Oura Ring. Shout out to Jessie Brebner, Fertility Charting on Instagram. She teaches the symptothermal method and for both contraception and conception. Amazing courses, outrageously affordable. They could be $1,000 course. I think they're $150 last time I checked. So if you're interested, I cannot recommend them enough. She assigned a relative temperature to track her temperature via the Oura Ring, and she found it correlated with her basal thermometer results. But I have to say, for me personally, it was the opposite. So my temperature went up on the TempDrop, down on the Oura Ring, vice versa, and it was an absolute dog's breakfast. So although I think the Oura Ring probably gives you relative data around, are you having a luteal phase, I would never ever recommend it if you're using the symptothermal method for contraception, because I think that's playing Russian roulette, personally, based on what I've seen, and also with a few clients too. But let's talk about the other ones that are really popular, the Whoop Band, the Fitbits, the Apple Watches, the Garmins. What I'll say is Fitbits and Garmins, perhaps most specifically, are more fitness-oriented, performance. And what I'll say, just blanket, is like, captain of the EMF Haters Club. I will only support those devices that can be put into flight mode. Now, I appreciate if you're tracking in real time data, you will have the Bluetooth on, and for those short periods of time, I'm not too worried about that. But some people wear these things 24/7, or at least during the day, to track steps and things like that. If it can't be put in flight mode, I think there's one model of Garmin that can, and Fitbit.
I used to have one of those Garmin models that could, but then they stopped making it, or I couldn't find it.
Right.
It's like Vivo Smart HR or something like that.
Okay.
Because it was the only one that I could find.
Interesting. Right.
That allowed me to turn it off, and it didn't track. Like, it would still accumulate, like, tracking my steps, but I wouldn't be able to visually see it on my device until I sunk it.
Yeah. Gotcha. Which is what I do with the Oura Ring too. Last time I checked, the Whoop Band cannot be put in flight mode either. I mean, I have spoken to clients about putting like a Faraday sock on their wrist, but that also is just a bit ridiculous.
Is this in line with telling people to take receipt tongs?
Yeah, and wear a tinfoil hat.
Yeah,
totally.
I can see why that hasn't
taken off.
No.
I'm so confused as to why it hasn't. So yeah, look, I'm not a hater of these devices, but for the love of your health, you need to be able to turn the wireless radiation off for the bulk of the time. Apple Watches, you absolutely can. And then you can, of course, switch them on and off to sort of check messages and calls if you want. But then it's just a very expensive computer that's not connected on your wrist. I mean, I'd consider one, but I just think the Oura Ring does enough, and I'd rather have my phone separately. So, yeah, they're okay. But they don't beat Oura Ring for general health tracking as far as I'm concerned, or the Ultra Human Ring. But they would if you're an athlete or a wannabe athlete or a weekend warrior. Look for one that you can put into flight mode, or wear a really ugly Faraday sock.
I used to want one for the GPS because I get lost so often. But then Bowen had one, and he used it.
He is your GPS.
Yeah, he is my GPS. And then he wore it when we were doing our WA hike.
Oh yeah.
And the parts of the track were not marked particularly well, and so we had to go off his watch. And I was like, oh, thank God you're wearing that watch. And then I had a look at it, and I was like, I have no idea what this is saying. So I'm like, would be wasted
Wouldn't
on
help
me.
me anyway.
I'm just going to take my husband everywhere I go where I could get lost. And I'm fine with that.
Oh my God.
Has extra benefits anyway.
He does. Many.
Yeah, carry snacks. So I think the final one that I want to speak to is, I guess it's not really like a wearable device as much as it is a way to track health data or data that relates to your health, which is tracking like food intake. So MyFitnessPal is one of the most common ones that I have used myself, have recommended to clients. And again, I think there are pros and cons to this. I think the benefits are that for a lot of people, I don't think they are aware fully of how much they are eating, under eating and overeating.
Sure.
And also are not aware of how much protein they actually need to get in a day and what that looks like in food terms. So I think it can be a really helpful tool to help with educating people in terms of, like, particularly in the context of, hitting protein requirements, eating enough food if you are a chronic undereater, or if you are on a weight loss journey and part of that strategy is, being in a calorie deficit and you're not super familiar with, how energy dense or not certain foods are, it can be a really helpful tool in that regard. And also I would say that MyFitnessPal is not perfect in terms of a lot of it is data that has been entered by other humans, and there's certain ways of using it that make it more accurate, and so you just want to make sure you spend some time learning about that. But it's just more important that you're consistent with whatever you're doing in terms of you're consistent with the like what you're entering. But that's probably like a story for another day. In terms of the drawbacks of doing that kind of tracking, obviously it can create a lot of like hyperfixation, a lot of anxiety around food and eating, around eating out, etc. And so I just think you have to know yourself and choose wisely. I don't think that tracking food or tracking your calories is innately just bad, and that no one should do it, and that calories don't count, and that you're barking up the wrong tree if you're doing that. But I do think that there are certain people or situations where it's not necessary, and it becomes something that is pulling you away from having a relationship with food, your body, your health, that feels a little bit more grounded in confidence with your choices, as opposed to reliance on the app to be like, oh yeah, I know. But I think it's just one of those nuances that you need to figure out yourself, and that, like all of these devices or tracking forms, the first step is self-awareness in terms of knowing yourself, knowing what your goal is, knowing what your relationship is like with motivation and with feedback, and then making an informed decision about, is this for me for a time? Is this for me with support? Is this actually not for me and I might need to find a different way? And then making a decision from that place.
That's such a smart way to approach it. And I think, all of these are tools that we can use to enhance our well-being in our life, but they could also detract from that if where our headspace is at isn't great, or we're vulnerable in a particular area. I know for me, I've used MyFitnessPal. I've also used Chronometer, which I really like. And for me, a couple of years ago, I discovered I was really under-eating. And then that allowed me to actually increase my food intake, and I felt better. Who would have thought?
Magic tool.
Absolute mystery and magic. But the other thing is more recently did it. I've done a couple of stints, and I think what you said is sometimes we can be under-eating or overeating macros or calories or whatever without realizing it. I did another stint maybe last year because I thought I was getting enough protein, and my protein intake was decent, but it wasn't like optimal, and it was just a bit shy of where I thought it actually was. So that allowed me just to kind of make some tweaks and upgrades. And then I more recently did it in the last, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, to track fiber. Because fiber is the new protein. And again, I don't have gut problems. I think I've maybe felt blocked up once in my life. But as a middle-aged woman, perimenopause.
That's an inside joke. That's why we're laughing.
Yeah. We'll circle back to that. I'm starting to think about excess estrogen and microbiome health and gut health long-term, and I just knew I wasn't quite getting enough. And this time around, I was definitely falling short, but I also was surprised. My calories actually probably still needed to be nudged up, to be honest, because my anxiety sort of turns me off food. But I was surprised at how much fat I was having. And I would not consider, I'm not on a keto diet, I don't have a high-fat diet, I'm not a fat dodger, I'm not trying to eat low fat either. Dodger. Those t-shirt salad dodgers?
Oh, yes.
So I'm not sort of deliberately trying to eat low fat, but I wasn't also eating typically high fatty foods, but man, that added up real quick.
Yeah, it does.
And it wasn't impacting my overall caloric intake, but I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because that's going to be influencing satiety, reducing my appetite, which is then going to reduce my desire for fibrous foods and protein. And then I also was considering, yes, my food's really good quality, but if I'm looking at the balance of essential fatty acids versus, poly, mono, and saturated fats, I'm like, there's probably room for improvement here. And if I reduce that, I'd probably be more hungry for fibrous veg and protein. So, I feel really lucky is the only, I don't really know how I managed to evade having disordered eating of any description. But I personally don't feel vulnerable to these tools triggering anything like that for me. But I know for many women, it absolutely is a risk that you want to be mindful of. Same with the step thing. And I think perhaps to sort of sum it all up, there really isn't any better feedback than your own body's signs, symptoms, and your intuition. And getting the Oura Ring actually showed me that. It showed me what I inherently suspected was true, but also helped me make the changes, be more motivated. And so you don't need a single tracker, really, because you deep down know, and all you might need to do is create a bit more stillness and reflection time to allow that, and you can get professional support. But if you feel like this is going to enhance your ability to take action, apply data, feedback, and tweak things, then we're all for that, aren't we?
We are. We are. And on that note, we hope you have an amazing rest of your day or night, and we will be back with you next week.
See you, friends. Bye.